Hello everyone remotely again. We are just trying to reconnect with Kari from NEFCO just to get an improved internet connection. Tell me when you hear things through your ears. Are you hearing Harry? No, not yet. It's kind of like double headset this with sort of very technical.
Is this better?
That's better. Harry, you're online. I think, right. Are you in my ears? Say something.
Can you hear me?
Much better, much better. Okay, so I'm suddenly discovering that pierced earrings is not a good idea with squeegee headphones. Anyway, please fire away and start again. NEFCO. Explain to us NEFCO.
Okay, thank you once more. So let's try again. NEFCO is a Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, and we only deal with environmental and financing climate projects. So nothing else, purely environment and more climate nowadays. And here we are discussing mainly the NICA or NICA because NEFCO has been involved in the carbon markets for many years, and mainly under CDM and also in JI earlier. And now we are also working on Article 6 under the Paris Agreement, which I will present a bit shortly, the whole NICA initiative. In addition to various investments, equity investments, lending to various countries, we are also heavily involved in something called Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, which is a energy access activity. Basically, we hope to bring about more than 1 million connections in Africa in the next 5 years, serving more than 6 million people. And we are working now in Burkina Faso, Liberia, Zambia, Mozambique, and Uganda, those countries. Total funded about 80 million euros, plus funded by Sweden, Denmark, Germany, and also we have Power Africa is involved. I guess I'll stop here. I hope Sharma can join shortly, and I'll present the NICA Article 6 activities in a short while. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry. I do have to say I am not sure on the vote of British Rail whether we're going to get Ash here at any time this morning, sadly. So what we could do, we'll remain hopeful, but what we might have to do is we might have to do a little bit of a switch of the sessions and maybe do part of the second panel up first in case he's able to join a little bit later. But let's carry on as we are for the moment, and we can always jump back if he is able to join us. So from there, what I'm going to do is just, if I flick a screen here, so now everybody remotely should be able to see the members of our panel, and I'm delighted that Mr. Boucham is now able to join us, which is great, from the government of Morocco. So, Mr. Boucham, if you'd like to come to the stage. Oh, yeah, just be getting fixed up with a headphone there. That is extremely good timing, because now that allows me to start introducing GGGI's work in the space of Article 6, what we're looking at, why we're looking at it, and where we're going. And Mr. Boucham is from the Ministry of Sustainable Development, it's now called in Morocco, and he's going to be able to speak about his experiences of working with GGGI. So we currently run 2 programs, shortly to be 3. And one second, let me just give a little bit of training here on the headphone scenario. Okay, the headphones, you need to use those only when the remote speaker is speaking. Otherwise, you should be able to just hear everyone in the room. Okay, perfect. So GGGI runs 2 programs currently and another program shortly to join it. The first program is called our DAPA program. We put funky acronyms to all of them. It makes it easier for us to understand. And that's funded by the Norwegian government. Our second program is called the MATS program, and that's run by the Swedish government, the Swedish Energy Agency actually. And then we're shortly to be joined by an Icky Programme, so German funding for what we will call our Icky Spark programme. So these three programs, what they're all doing is trying to ready governments in host countries, so potential sellers of ITMOs under Article 6, ready them to be able to trade. So when we say ready them, we're not readying them for one trade, we're readying them to enter a market and to trade multiple times. And we're doing this now across 13 countries it will be, so anywhere from Indonesia, Vietnam, Nepal, Morocco and Senegal, which obviously touches on Bianca's area, then over to Colombia and beyond. So we're active in quite a lot of countries. Each program looks at a different aspect, and this is where we start getting into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. So our Swedish energy program looks at what I would call the traditional project-based activities. So there in Nepal, we're working with APC, who is a biogas company that has great experience in the CDM already. They've done several projects and are now looking, with the help of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and also the Green Climate Fund, to look at how they can incorporate more difficult streams of waste like fecal sludge into biogas digesters. And then hopefully that is then, because it's new and additional, we've proved the additionality of it, the idea is that they can sell the additional carbon credits as ITMOs under Article 6. So that's in one country. In Vietnam, we're looking at energy efficiency in the garment sector. And of course, companies such as H&M are very keen on this area to have more sustainable garment industry. So that is allowing us to say we know that greener efficiencies in the garment industry cost money, but because you've got buyers that really want to do greener things and that they want greener products, that's overriding the potential carbon leakage to another country. And then finally, we're also looking in Ethiopia at industrial parks. And industrial parks, the problem with many of the African countries is poor grid efficiency. And especially somewhere like Ethiopia, you've got a large amount of hydros. So you've got that sort of double impact of mitigation and adaptation, in the sense that your hydros are less efficient now due to less rainfall. So therefore, so often they're ending up in industrial parks having to switch over to diesel gensets. So what we're trying to do is put in solar on rooftops on that. Our Nordic program, our Norway program, is the DAPA program is looking at policy approaches. So this is a very different, very new area of work that hasn't really managed to get anywhere during the Kyoto period, because the CDM, effectively through its methodologies, the nearest it got to really scaling up was programs of activities. So this is trying to take a national policy, the implementation of a national policy, and by putting in that national policy, you reduce emissions over a much wider scale, and over a certain emission reduction, you can call that additional and trade that. So we'll have a good example from Mr. Boucham of what I'm talking about there. But that is looking, which countries are we looking at? Indonesia, Vietnam, Senegal, and Morocco. And then our final program, which is in the final stages of approval at the moment with BMU and the German government, is our Icky program. And that program is looking at capacity building and readiness for Article 6. That will be in Pakistan, Zambia, Thailand, and Colombia. And the interesting thing with that one is it's going to include nature-based solutions, land-based programs, which many of the Article 6 pilots are unable to look at initially. So it's all very exciting stuff. We're very appealed by it. GGGI is looking to also start a carbon platform to bring together through our membership buyers and sellers, agree criteria for these programs, and to be able to put together a platform of ready carbon or IPMOs for not only the public sector to buy, but also trying to find that link between the private sector and the public sector. There's already a couple of governments we're speaking to about that. So that's a little bit about GGGI in this space, and I hope we'll be able to answer all audience questions during the Q&A. But what I'd like to do is just move now to Mr. Boucham for him to explain on the Morocco example, what are we looking at? What does a policy approach really mean, and what is it in practice? So please, Mr. Boucham, please explain.
Thank you very much. First of all, I say sorry to be late because...
Don't worry. Don't worry, the moderator hasn't even turned up at all, so...
Hotel fast and formalities for entry.
Exactly, getting in the door.
I am glad to be here, and thank you for inviting Morocco to share its experience. So I can start with experience with CDM. We got this experience. Then we go to NAMAs. We have experience, and we built a few NAMAs in agriculture, in energy, transport, and waste. Then we have NDC. So our revised NDC, it's very ambitious. We are seeking to reach more than 45% as ambition to cut down our emissions. And we are glad to work with the GGI in policy approach and even in sectoral projects. And I want to thank Swedish Energy Agency and also Climate and Environment Ministry of Norway. I think that Morocco is prepared because we have some institutional like inventory, national inventory system that can help us to do inventory that we use in even in national communication, in Bianca report or in NDCs. And in the future we will use it in the biennial transparency report. Beside the inventory system, we have MRV system, and there is a national cross-multilateral ministry committee, and also we have a national committee on climate change and biodiversity. This committee, there is some working groups like mitigation, adaptation, finance, and capacity building. And we are expecting to discuss in the future in a transaction of carbon, especially in the working group of finance and mitigation. With this, we are working on a law, climate change law, that we will deal with the registry and will deal with the accreditation and verification, all the environment that we need to do transaction of carbon. Fenella was talking about the support of GGI. Yes, in the policy approach, especially DAPA, we have projects on energy field, seeking the integration and the connection of voltage, medium voltage to be connected on the grid from the industrial sector, and this energy will be, the source will be renewable energy, and also to seek the possibility to sell electricity coming from renewable energy to neighborhood connection. So I think that we are good enough prepared, but we account a lot on GGI and other institutes to improve our capacity building and to have some techniques to be ready to apply Article 6 when it will be adopted in the future. And we hope we will adopt this Article 6 in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mr. Boucham. I think, certainly a great little taste. So just, again, the policy approach that we're looking at there is, for those who have an energy background, when I say wheeling to you, you know what I mean. For the rest of the human race, everyone's going to say, what the heck is that? It's basically an industrial site, generates more power than it needs, and it uses the grid as a transportation system for that electricity to another industrial site. So the grid, instead of being the source and provider for all, becomes merely a system for moving power around. That's called wheeling, and you can't do it in Morocco at the moment. So for small and medium-sized companies, if we can get that going, then there's a lot more areas and places that might generate electricity. Private sector will invest in it. Then you move that around. It creates further reductions than would otherwise have happened under the unconditional NDC. They can sell those additional transactions. The advantage, particularly for this policy approach, it's really difficult sometimes on policies to work out, did that ton of carbon get reduced exactly because of that policy, or was it for another reason? If you're doing something that's connected with the grid, it's a bit easier to measure, because if we can't measure it, we can't quantify it. If you can't quantify it, you can't price it and trade it. So that's the kind of idea around the more complex policy approaches. I think I'd love to come back in the Q&A session and ask you more around the MRV, the registries. This is a really expensive area that I don't think we've considered, and I think maybe Bianca, you may touch on this in your section, and we may talk about that in the Q&A a little bit more. So, okay. That's given you a little bit of a flavor of kind of GGGI, Morocco's experiences in this area. And
can I add something?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. About our national inventory system, we will account on it because our NDC is the projection for 2030. And the inventory system will give us the real emission for specific years. So we will see if we have additional emission that we can go to the carbon transaction. So even in unconditional fill.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that gives you your tracking.
That's
so you've got your goal, your NDC, you've got your inventory.
That's it.
Okay, interesting question here then. Because we've got some extra time, because Ash isn't here, sorry, I'm sort of a little bit of riffing a bit here and probably going off piece. But just then, what's the time delay? So the problem is your NDC goes up like this. You're saying, okay, so in 2023, I'm predicting I'm going to have X number of spare credits. When will your inventory catch up and be able to say yes or no?
Yeah, we will work on the trend of emission. If we do a rate calculation for specific year, for 2020, 2021, and we will have an idea for the trend. So we'll see if we have done much more mitigation effort.
Okay.
That we can think about the carbon pricing and to do, even as I said, in unconditional parts.
Of course, of course.
And we need the help for this inventory system.
Yes, exactly. So all international organizations looking at MRV, transparency, registries. This is a call for. This is where we can. This is where you can point your funding and projects. Okay, let's move on. So now I want to move to the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches and the East Africa Alliance. So it's great we're joined by Carrie and Bianca here, who are going to be able to, I am going to read this, and I do apologise, that doesn't look terribly professional, but as I say, I'm standing in. So, the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches, financed by Finland, Norway, Sweden, and the Nordic Council of Ministers, UNEP. So it strives to demonstrate how international partnerships can scale up and accelerate ambitious climate action, promote sectoral approaches, sustainable development, and harness private sector finance and innovation. The East Africa Alliance will present the work on future carbon market readiness in Uganda, including comments on institutional and legal frameworks, such as principles on share of proceeds and corresponding adjustments, something that is very pertinent to the negotiations right at this moment. So, Kari and Bianca, I pass to you. Thank you. Headphones.
Thank you very much, Fanella.
Stay there.
I'm very pleased to present the NICA, the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches, and as Fanella mentioned, this is activity that's been funded by Finland, Sweden, Norway, NEFCO, and Nordic Council Ministers. And we also have some other Nordic stakeholders involved in our work here. And it sort of supplements the other Nordic initiatives. Sweden, Norway, as we know, are very active in this field, but we have this sort of common Nordic platform to discuss and further develop Article 6 issues here. NICA was established in 2018, and it's sort of a way of scaling up or following up of this extensive Nordic experience on Kyoto Protocol mechanisms, JI and CDM. And in Nordic countries, we have sort of fairly similar Nordic principles and priorities, so the collaboration is fairly easy. And all the Nordic countries have rather ambitious climate policies. They have all carbon neutrality targets. They have a slight different ways of dealing with that and how much countries may possibly utilize Article 6 and so on. And there's a high ambition, there's high integrity. So we have all these elements in place there. So from NICA's perspective, we hope to scale up, accelerate ambitious climate action, definitely ambitious climate actions. Of course, we need to move from projects to programs, activities. We cannot discuss sort of project only, even though we do need the actual activities on the ground as well. That may be project, but of course linked to programs. We definitely promote sustainable development, and especially gender aspects are really key for many Nordic countries. So all those issues will be taken into account. And also we definitely need private sector involvement. We cannot solve the climate issues without the private sector's key involvement. And CDM provides kind of good background, lots of experience where the private sector had kind of very direct incentive to be involved in climate actions. NICA, so basically we have this Nordic collaboration. We try to share information. We are seeking synergies between different actions, so we don't sort of. So we try to find a niche where various Nordic players can add value, and I'll come back to that in a second. Currently, we are mainly aiming for the actual pilot. We have a couple of consulting assignments ongoing. We are looking at the moment mainly in Uganda as a possible piloting country. We are also considering other countries. We have done some work previously and will do some other work on other countries, partially based on the COP outcomes. So that's a possibility that we would like to take another look at some other countries as well. But the Uganda currently is a focus for possible piloting. Also, we are sort of designing sort of a general framework where we could sort of combine all these key issues, ambition, sustainable development sort of framework for the Nordic kind of combine Nordic ideas into framework. So this is being developed at the moment. We also seek synergies with the various activities, including, as I mentioned earlier, we have this large energy access program in Africa, beyond the Grid Fund for Africa, where we could seek synergies, for example, with productive use of grid electricity, providing some interesting emission reduction and other benefits. Why piloting? Many Nordic currently active players were already active in the Kyoto world and even in pre-Kyoto era. So it was really kind of piloting, learning by doing. There was even before Kyoto was enforced, many Nordic countries were really active in the Kyoto markets, and we believe that it really shaped the market. It helped to develop the rules, monitoring protocols, and things like that, basically informing markets. Many Nordic countries were very early players in the Kyoto markets, and to some extent we would like to duplicate that and really learn from the past. And what NICA could possibly offer here, sort of niche activities, fast track, simple, bottom up, to demonstrate how Article 6 could work in principle, because there are a lot to be learned. We have a lot from the CDM. Of course, we need to go beyond the CDM, but we would need to utilize, or should utilize, all the lessons learned, methodologies from CDM, but go beyond to move more like to programs and policy kind of activities. We also interested to combine climate and carbon finance. As we know, there's a lot of climate finance around, and how to, in a fair, transparent way, combine carbon with climate finance. Also, we see that as we know, some host countries have been a bit reluctant to maybe engage in Article 6 activities. We aim to kind of go for small, sort of low-risk activities in that sense, that from NDC point of view, and those could be later scaled up. So really to fast track and try to learn how Article 6 in practice could work. And even in our many CDM activities, we have already gone in many times sort of beyond the CDM. We have been involved in a project which are really overly additional, and this ambition is always there when we consider our activities in Article 6. So basically, to kind of learning by doing, it's sort of hands-on capacity building process to really add value, to complement also other initiatives, and it's sort of stepping stone for the host countries to really try to develop these procedures for Article 6. And of course, we know that even hopefully we will have the rule book in place, but even after that, there will be a lot to be fine-tuned. The detailed rules may need some more, or will need some more work in the coming months and years and so on. Thank you. I'll stop here.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Harry. Whoop. Thank you so much, Carrie. That's great. Okay, Bianca, if I can pass to you, please. Feel free to wander around the stage, sit still, whatever you feel comfortable with.
I'm good here, thank you. I hope everyone can hear me just fine. Great.
Yeah.
As introduced, thank you, Fenella. My name is Bianca Gishangi from the Eastern Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. It's a mouthful, but we get used to it. And we have 7 member countries at the moment, and that's Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, Burundi, Rwanda, and Sudan. And the alliance is country-based in the sense that each of them have a focal point, and through these focal points nominated from various ministries, they put forward the requests in the particular areas around carbon pricing Article 6 that they would need support in. So all the activities we do are around what the members want. So it's been very clear that the members want to take part in the carbon market activities, and they want to do it long-term. So the aims are usually around enhancing readiness for Article 6 through capacity building initiatives, trainings, courses, knowledge products, but we also support well-coordinated negotiators, so to bring them up to speed and make sure they take part in these sessions, and regional collaboration. But for today, I think I'll focus on the capacity building, and particularly for Uganda, because that's what we're discussing. And basically, Uganda has actually put in a lot of requests forward, and they were one of the countries that requested an institutional, infrastructure, and legal framework assessment in conjunction with Ethiopia. And then we decided to extend it to all the members. So we looked at all of them in these three different aspects to see how ready they were for Article 6 and what gaps were there. So across all of them, legally speaking, they don't have a policy framework for carbon assets, but some of them do have climate change laws, like Uganda and Kenya. However, there is a lot more regulation that will be required moving forward, so that's something that they will need to work on for sure. But in terms of institutional frameworks, we definitely saw a lot of existing capacity through the DNAs that were already there and through CDM. And Uganda itself has quite a high CDM portfolio right after Kenya in different areas to do with energy generation mainly. So it has taken part in both CDM and the voluntary carbon markets. So what we've seen is that now with the institutional setup for Article 6, there is a willingness or sort of like an indication that these same ministries will probably take over moving into Article 6, but it hasn't been formally communicated. And that's one thing which is quite simple, but needs to be done because there's a lot of responsibility that's required across different aspects of implementing Article 6 from their government level. So you're looking at the approval of projects, you're looking at authorization, you're looking at applying corresponding adjustments, you're looking at sustainable development criteria. There's quite a bit. And for that, you do need a dedicated team. So it does help if you can identify quite early which ministry will be responsible for this and who will be responsible, even in terms of human capacity, whether you'll be able to have somebody to do this work. So it's looking like it might be the ministry, but I can't say for sure because it's not been formally announced, but we're hoping. So everyone is really hoping for the rules to come out and then they'll move forward. But the good thing is that even though they haven't formally said this is the ministry, we have been doing a lot of capacity building, so they're up to speed on what is required, but they also understand that it will take a while, so they'll need to get on it quite fast. And then like one aspect I can tell you for sure that they were keen on is like corresponding adjustments, because this is a area that has been debated for a very long time in the negotiations. How do you do it? We haven't even decided exactly how to do it. But there have been proposals put forward, and we've seen a level of proactiveness to try and understand this. So they've asked for like a training on how you would go about this, different methods or how to go about it. And of course, it's quite complex when you start adding in issues of conditionality. And the training we did was just a simple 3-day online session. We couldn't cover everything, but we definitely covered the basics, because what you need even is just a general understanding even within the ministries. So what I can say from that is that it wasn't just them, it was open to the whole region. So definitely other government officials took part, and they're starting to really get a picture on how this would work. And I'm not saying that they're doing it a certain way, because they're different methods, but the template was explored, they gave feedback, and then there's always room for further improvement. And then in terms of infrastructure, we've seen that they will need registries and MRV systems if they are going to take part in Article 6. But some of Uganda has an MRV system that they're working on, at least they've made quite some progress with it. But we've seen that they might not need super complex systems to start off with. Like even just for normal tracking of the projects, you can use a very simple form of tracking those. Yeah, it doesn't have to be super complex. Exactly. Yes. So, and then now maybe when we're looking at it regionally, we can have a bit more complex. But to start off with, Excel works just fine. Yeah, interestingly, yeah, we don't need super. So interim registries could be quite simple and Excel based. From what we saw in the study. But definitely, I think moving forward, there's a lot of anticipation for the rules to come out. But yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. But at least we can say that there is a bit more readiness than with CDM, and hopefully we can hit the ground running once it comes in. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Bianca. And I think really interesting there. Yeah, there's all the experience from CDM. It's a really interesting point, and I'm going to go straight into the questions at this point, but Mr. Bouchan, forgive me, because I'm going to wing an unprepared question at you, which is, you interestingly say, Bianca, which ministry is going to lead this? And I think this is quite a challenging question. Can you explain how we've had to put together the steering committee in Morocco, because it can't be just one ministry when you're thinking about corresponding adjustments? Mr. Bouchan.
Yeah, in the case of Morocco, we are used to work with the steering committees, even for communication, national communication or Unep Dtu reports, because the thematic concern many departments. So even if we talk energy, yeah, there is territory, there's transport, and of course the environment. So we're trying to engage a lot of ministries and departments, and also some NGOs, and also private sector. So we're used to do this, but in our case, that was we capitalized the history, and we decide to choose the important ministry that can help, and the door is always open if we see that there's another apartment that can help us to go further. Yeah, we invite them.
Yeah, so I think what you can take from that is, if you think a CDM project required one little letter of approval, I say a little letter, I mean we all thought it was terribly difficult at the time to get a host country letter of approval for your project. You know, welcome today. This is a steering committee that I think you currently have 6 ministries on?
Yes.
6 ministries in one steering committee, and then you then have to decide which ministry is going to lead and take it from there before you can do a corresponding adjustment. So just a bit of a idea of how complex that can be. Okay, then I'll jump to a question maybe for Carrie. Carrie, you've quickly, sorry, yeah, headphones on for those of us on stage again. So you have touched upon the reason why you're doing pilots, but I do want to understand that pilots in themselves, quite often, then there isn't really an economic case for them. So can you say, what is the business case for doing piloting? Why do it?
Thank you, Fanela. Well, it may not be the business case as such, but I mean, this is what we think is needed to have a real market to scale up. And as we all know, and as you just discussed, there are quite a few elements that need to be tested, proven, have all the procedures in place, and let's say small scale piloting, going through all these steps could really help to develop the market and fine-tune these rule procedures, which even if there's a rule book in place, the details may still be missing, and that we need sort of real life experience to fine-tune those. This is exactly what happened in JI and even in early CDM phase. I mean, not all details were in place, and the actual projects helped to fine-tune the rules, and we were able to improve the methodologies, projects, additionality requirements, so on. So we believe we need this piloting to really inform all the stakeholders, the whole procedure. I think it's sort of cost-effective way to make things work.
Okay.
For the scaling up phase.
Perfect. So
needs.
actually, you mustn't see it as a financial business case. You must see it as a case for putting in the structures that will then do the further projects, which I think is probably a far better way of looking at it and informing the rule book and improving the methodologies. So Bianca, if I turn to you briefly, I have been given a few minute warning, but if I turn to you briefly and just ask, where do you think there might be a competitive advantage for Africa and vis-a-vis the larger emerging market emitters in Article 6?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can look at it in different aspects. So I think the piloting is one important aspect in terms of giving us that proactivity to sort of be ready and not be left behind, or when the project's really because the demand is going to be quite high. We're already seeing it in the VCM. So when Article 6 does come in, that proactiveness of piloting will help ready countries. And we're seeing this also with the bilateral agreements that are being signed. So that's sort of setting the legal basis that will now help be a solid foundation for private sector to act in these countries. So, but also the NDCs themselves, I think, because African countries generally tend to prioritize adaptation quite a bit. So now that we're seeing quite a lot of mitigation ambition, there's a lot of opportunity there. And you're seeing a difference because if we look at the success they had with the CDM, which was on small scale activities like cook stoves, we now have opportunities for large scale projects. If you go policy wise, you definitely have opportunity, in new sectors like transport. And this is important because the economies are growing. Emerging economies eventually will stabilize before African economies, so we really are at an advantage. So I think those are some of the areas to look at, and then those sectors themselves, so the nature-based solution sectors and sectors that we hadn't touched on before, where we're seeing the piloting happen. We're seeing piloting like in transport now, so that's great.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Bianca. Mm-hmm. Okay, and I'm getting the 1 minute warning here, so Mr. Boucham, they'll get you, but if I can quickly come to you and just do a last question. Climate finance, carbon finance. Okay, there's two forms. Where are the opportunities to link them, and which sectors do you think are the best sectors to try and link climate and carbon finance?
First of all, I will give you an example. In our Ministry of Environment, or now it's Energy Transition and Development, we have experience with PMR. And the PMR gave a scenario for Morocco to start with tax and then switch to ETS. But the announcement for the tax has been done by Ministry of Finance. So, no, I think that it could be one of both, even Sustainable Development Department or Ministry of Finance. But it will be coordination and committees.
Thank you so much. And thank you very much for being brief, because then I didn't get into trouble for that one.
No, it's welcome.
So I think we're going to, I'll say, Carrie, Bianca, Mr. Boucham, thank you so much for joining the first half of what is a whole morning panel on Article 6. Fun. So now, unfortunately, Carrie, you don't get to join in what looks like some rather yummy pastries here. But please, we will take a 10-minute break. Please enjoy some pastry and some coffee, and then we will come back for the second half of our panel. So please, put your hands together and let's say a warm thank you to our panelists.
take off. Okay, we're... All right, now I think we are ready for the second half of this session on Article 6 and implementation of market mechanisms. Now, it's a great honor to be here, and welcome to all colleagues and friends, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen. First, I would wish to thank NEFCO and partners here at the Nordic Pavilion again for allowing us to be here and for the opportunity to moderate this session. My name is Ingvild Solvang, and I'm the Deputy Director and Head of Climate Change, Climate Action and Inclusive Development, also at the Global Green Growth Institute. I'm usually based in Seoul, South Korea, together with Fenella, who you met in the first half of the session. It's an honor to be here today with such a lovely bouquet of fellow speakers. So welcome to all of you as well. In this second half, we will be talking about support to push and go beyond NDCs under Article 6 and market mechanisms. And what we talk about when we talk about pushing beyond is both in terms of sorry, there we go. That's hopefully better. Yes. So we are talking about ambitions both in terms of mitigation, reduction of emission, but also in terms of achieving sustainable development goals, including also gender equality and women's empowerment. Without further ado, let me quickly introduce. We'll get to know them a bit better, but let's just quickly go through who we have on stage. We have Mr. Pham Van Tan,
yes,
who is the Deputy Director General at the Department of Climate Change, Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment of Vietnam. Welcome. We have Aglaya Espelage, who is a consultant at Perspectives Climate Group. We have Janet Gurung, who is the director of WOCAN. And last but certainly not least, we have Karen Olsen, senior researchers at Unep Dtu Partnership. So welcome to all of you. And let's dive straight in, starting with Perspectives Climate Group. They were commissioned by the Swedish Energy Agency to conduct research on how market stakeholders and countries and governments can ensure that Article 6 cooperation takes into account impacts on achievement of NDC targets and NDC implementation plans, while also promoting sustainable development and enable ambition. So starting with you, Aglaya, could you please share a bit about the research?
Yes, thank you very much, Ingvild. So we have been doing this research now over the course of this year, and we have been doing it together with other colleagues from Perspectives and also from Climate Focus. We've been working together on that, and drawing on some case studies, but also drawing on data that we could gather from the updated NDCs, we basically asked ourselves two guiding questions. The first one is, okay, how does it conceptually fit? How does the discussion on Article 6 fit into NDCs and NDC implementation plans? Like, what are the key links? What is needed in NDCs and NDC implementation plans that is relevant for Article 6 and the other way around? And based on that first conceptual study that we discussed with stakeholders, also the Asia Pacific Climate Week, and we launched the first report, we then took this more as framework for assessment and applied it to all the NDCs that were submitted in the past 2 years and how they relate to Article 6. What is the kind of mandate that is described and communicated in NDCs to Article 6, but also what are further anchors in NDCs that can be helpful to inform any sort of Article 6 strategy, including how it links to sustainable development. And then we did some case studies and we looked a bit further into in total 6 countries and how they are approaching Article 6 readiness. So we had Colombia, Ethiopia, and Vietnam that are preparing to potentially be authorizing transfers, but we also looked at how the governments of Japan, Sweden, and Switzerland are approaching their engagement with other countries and building their bilateral cooperations. And this is how we were trying to define some lessons.
Lovely, great. Now I'm wondering, sort of in this work, how do we define Article 6 readiness?
Yeah, I think that was a very interesting discussion that we had, because I mean, being ready for Article 6 means for a country to be able to use that international engagement to serve its objectives. So, and I think we always speak a lot about sellers and buyers, but I think we need to acknowledge that engaging in international cooperation can serve very, very different objectives for both perspectives. So it can relate to, if you look at your NDC, you're saying, okay, in this sector we're having difficulty of implementing market instruments. So we want to set incentives for private sector, or we have difficulty in accessing data. But if we use market-based projects, we have an incentive to the private sector to give us the data, and we can better understand the mitigation opportunities. You might want to say, okay, I have a list of technologies I need for my NDC, or maybe my conditional NDC, and I want to say a positive list for clearly additional technologies. I want to see those technologies implemented. So strategies can be very, very different, right? But in the context of acknowledging that we have different strategies and that they change over time, I think especially with implementation of domestic markets, we will see an evolution also away from the classical separation of sellers on the market and buyers on the market to a more integrated strategy. So acknowledging that, I think Article 6 readiness means, first of all, to have that clearly formulated objective and a plan for engaging in international markets, and how that links to your own strategies, the NDC, but also the long-term vision may even be very, very relevant reference point. And then on the second point, to then set in place the institution and the interministerial collaboration, and we heard a lot about this in the first session, that is needed to achieve your objectives, and then very, very specifically to fulfill the participation requirements, and that relates a lot for governments to the ability to be able to monitor and track, do the authorizations and the accountings for your market-based engagement. So they're like these three layers that then help a country be ready, understanding that this is a process, and as objectives change over time, and as your climate strategies get updated, of course, you're constantly getting ready to do this, right? So.
Yes. Now, and diving a little bit more into the links between Article 6 readiness and NDCs, could you talk a little bit more about your findings on that?
Yeah, I think that, NDCs set a bit the framework conditions of how you engage in international cooperation, right? They explain your targets, they explain your objectives. They often embed the climate action targets put forward into a broader set of principles and sustainable development objectives. So this is something what is communicated through the NDCs. And that NDCs can give the mandate for the Article 6 and some direction on your priorities. But I think, and this will be very, very important in the years going forward, countries are now preparing the NDC implementation plans or the policy documents that go along with NDCs. And those are really, really important documents to define an Article 6 strategy. It's not just enough to write in your NDC, yeah, I want to do Article 6. You need to understand what kind of policy instruments are you using to achieve your NDC. What is what are the cost options of your mitigation abatement? These are things that are being elaborated in the lead up to formulating NDC. It's often not public information, or that is then put into the NDC implementation plans. And this is the information that then helps you to define where Article 6 can find that additional mitigation outcome, where it can really help you. And if you then combine that with a long-term strategy, that really helps you redefine and have a very strategic engagement. So I think there is a two-way road here. So engaging in markets, especially maybe in sectors where you have been having difficulty of introducing a lot of difficult to fund the abatement opportunities with the domestic resources or for technologies, can help you inform your next round of NDCs. It can help you build that long-term ambition. And the other way around, having a clear view on your NDC is really important so you can benefit from that international engagement. So it's a bit of a two-way street, and it may be even a chicken and egg problem right now. And hopefully we can solve that through piloting, yeah.
Yes, and I think there are many chickens and eggs, and perhaps also when we talk about the most pressing Article 6 readiness needs, so perhaps this is a question to both of you. What are the most pressing readiness issues at the moment?
Yeah, well, I can maybe start with some general findings, and then I'll hand over to you to elaborate a bit further, maybe on the Vietnamese government's perspective. So I think in general, what we see a lot is that every country is now at that point in time where they really need to find out how Article 6 fits into their NDC. And I'm saying it such a generic note, but that's actually quite a difficult task, right? You need to really put together all that information. And I think that is something which is really important. A second part, and this is the ability to monitor and track your emissions and having a strong MRV system. Markets can help build that MRV system, but you also need a strong MRV system. So again, and one point we also see is there are many activities ongoing and many initiatives. And I do believe one readiness need, let's say, or something which would help, is to have to facilitate more peer-to-peer learning and to facilitate a better coordination and lesson learning from all the activities that are ongoing. That can unlock a better readiness, generally. And I think that in many countries, that institutional fragmentation and different institutions engaging in international markets, that's often a big challenge of having a harmonized national approach to it. But I'll leave you to complete it.
Yeah. So first, I would like to congratulate you with a very comprehensive report that you have done during the COVID time. When I read that, I see that during COVID time, but the information you put in the report is very up-to-date in case of Vietnam, and then it's quite useful with insight analysis. I love that report. So yes, you see that Article 6, we consider that is one part, very important part to achieve our national target in NDC. So how to involve stakeholders in that Article 6 implementation in Vietnam. So after we submitted our NDC, we reflected the content of NDC in national policy document. It includes the law on environmental protection that have been approved by the National Assemblies in 2020, November 2020. Then we also reflected it in the decree, the government decree for greenhouse gas reduction and ozone layer protection. We also have one decision of Prime Minister to identify who should be the major emitters in Vietnam, because as you mentioned that the market, we need to have who sell and who buy. So in Vietnam, we consider that not only international market apply for Vietnam, but we need to develop our own market, domestic market, create the area, the platform for own players in Vietnam. So we have to assign for who are the major emitter in Vietnam and put the cap for each of them. So government decree, government decision, we already submitted to the government, and then it's ready to sign, going to effect on the 1st of January 2022. That is a requirement by the law. And yes, with that, we request major emitter who exceed certain level have to do greenhouse gas inventories and then report. Then we take several years to identify the actual level of emission of each facilities and then put the target. As you see that in the case of developing country, normally we do greenhouse gas from top down, not the bottom up. So when we do the market, we have to know that how much of greenhouse gas emission from facility level have emit every year. So that is big challenges for us. So we have to start from beginning, and then I think I love the report, and then you also mentioned that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much to both of you. Now, we've spoken quite a lot about the mitigation ambition part of it. Now let's turn a little bit to the SDG co-benefit perspective. So within the scope of your research and readiness, what did you find in terms of the alignments that are required to also ensure sustainable development coming out of market mechanisms?
So just in generally, we have been looking at all the NDCs submitted in the past 2 years, and we have just published that analysis. And I think what we have seen in there is that there are quite a number of countries, I think half of the countries that put in a mandate for Article 6, put in some conditions, and that's very, very often sustainable development. But we also see that it's kind of stuck there, right? And I do believe that there is still a long way to go, and this is a task now for the NDC implementation plans to find solutions for that challenge of having national sustainable development priorities and link that back to the priorities you're setting when you're deciding in what kind of sectors, what kind of technologies you're engaging in Article 6. So we have been looking at that, but from what I see in the NDCs, it's still at a very generic level, and it's definitely, I think, a challenge to come. We see pilot activities putting a lot of emphasis on it, but we will still need to see in the NDC implementation plan that hopefully give us a few more hooks to link the Article 6 strategy more strongly to the national priorities and sustainable development, which many, many countries evoke. So,
yes. Now, that is perfect segue into the next speaker. Dr. Janet Gurung is one of the real innovative thinkers in the space of gender and climate change and women's empowerment and climate change. The founding director of the global network Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management, which shortens to WOCAN. I know that WOCAN now is taking on some really exciting piloting opportunities to really get women's empowerment in a very concrete way into market mechanisms in collaboration with the Swedish Energy Agency. So I am very, very keen to hear your perspectives and your experience on that.
Thank you very much, Ingvild. It's a great pleasure to be here and be able to talk about very concrete solutions and mechanisms to bring about gender equality impacts and alongside of climate impacts. I think the world is quickly warming up to understanding that we cannot achieve the climate goals we seek unless we also have women's inclusion and gender equality. This COP feels different in that way to me. So we, realizing this some years ago, my organization decided that maybe we could use carbon markets and carbon markets mechanism to incentivize that kind of inclusion of gender equality within climate mitigation projects. This solution for co-benefits, we believe, it's also, we've realized recently, the W+ standard, which is what it's called, measures, quantifies, and monetizes women's empowerment benefits within a project. Doesn't have to be a climate-oriented project, but that's what we're talking about here. It also is unique, I think, in that it requires a benefit-sharing mechanism. So, for example, you can have a W+ credit, and we were inspired by the carbon markets and the process. So anyone who understands a carbon standard can understand the W+ standard. And the idea is that it's a premium label on top of a carbon credit, right? We require that at least 20% of the value, the price of that carbon unit, the W+ unit, is shared with women's groups of the community within the project, and they are to do with that money whatever they deem possible. And we realize that also addresses some of what we're hearing here at the COP so much about adaptation versus mitigation finance. This is a way to use mitigation finance to also fund adaptation responses. So we're really pleased to be able to now work on this pilot with SEA, as Ingvild mentioned. This is particularly interesting to me because in listening to the previous session talk about Nordic ideas, what is Nordic idea? Well, I think the world associates Nordic ideas with gender equality, I'm happy to say. And I think in Sweden's case, it's particularly important because they have a feminist foreign policy. There's 5 other governments in the world who do this. I wish all the Nordic countries had this, but it was interesting when SEA came to us and they said, you solved our problem. And we said, what problem do you have? And they said, problem is we're buying ITMOs. And then the rest of the government comes to us and said, what are you doing for our feminist foreign policy? How do you link ITMOs to this? So they found us, and we are now working on a pilot in a couple countries, we hope. And this is supposed to be able to provide the kind of learning about how Article 6 could could potentially also relate to SDGs, at least in the case of SDG 5.
Now, and I know you are tirelessly advocating and lobbying for this. Now, what is the potential to scale up this pilot, Janet, on W+? And think about it, monetizing women's empowerment. I mean, how cool is that, right? Now, what is the potential to scale that up through the market mechanism?
What's not the potential, right? I mean, if we can get Article 6 to recognize a mechanism to relate to SDG 5, we could potentially have all the governments of the world being able to use, and the standard is a very concrete thing. It has indicators of how we measure real impact along 6 domains that we determined with rural women in Kenya and Nepal. And we said, what does women's empowerment mean to you? And then we developed the methodology to measure those things. So if the market would take it up, if the countries would take it up, if it could be seen as we are now also not only affiliated with carbon standards such as Vera and VCS, but also with some of the SDG metrics and those kind of standards as well, recognizing the W+ as the methodology to measure SDG 5. So what would stop it from scaling?
Yes, no, exactly. Now, so importantly, you really have a way to quantify women's empowerment. I think that's the real strength of the framework that you offers. Now, what are some of the barriers to the uptake? I know that it's, we are here to speak about it also to raise awareness of the fact that yes, you can measure, you can quantify, exactly. But what are the barriers to?
Well, that first is a lack of understanding that this is a tool and it's out there. We've been around for 6 years with the standard, but the uptake is still not that large. I think people are still not aware as much as possible. There's still not an understanding of the nexus between gender and climate impacts. We're still always having to do that advocacy. I think once we can get the market to a few market players to purchase these demands, show what the price would be, that will serve as a great incentive to do for all kinds of project developers. But we also don't see enough women. We would love for women and women's organizations to be carbon project developers. And there's actually quite few of those, we think, at the time. But that's another area that could be extremely interesting way to scale up and get many, many more women engaged in carbon and climate mitigation.
Yeah. And maybe to demystify it even further, and we have a few minutes now, if you could dive into some of those, what are those concrete impacts and concrete links between the projects that I think a lot of people in the audience are working on, these mitigation, right, emission reduction projects. Now, what is the women's empowerment impact?
So I want to use here the first, and we did this with South Pole, who's also in the audience here. We did the first W+ application to a biogas project. You mentioned AEPC in Nepal. That was the partner agency for this. They were producing biogas digesters at individual household level. And we talked to women and we found out, although that was a classic case where they were only measuring the carbon and the ITMOs maybe and using CDM mechanism, what they were not accounting for was this was changing women's lives, right? Because they were looking through carbon lens. And so when we started to say to them, and women there said time saving was the transformational impact on their lives. So we measured, so the W+ allows for measuring in time, health, leadership, food security, income and assets, knowledge and education. So a project needs to demonstrate changes in benefits to women in at least one of those areas. In that case, we took time saving. We measured 2.5 hours per day saved by women. I think this is a perfect example of an existing carbon project that wasn't thinking. Who said it? Was Fenella who said, we don't measure, we don't quantify, we don't monetize, we don't know what's happening, right? It was us looking at how women were affected by that, and it was an easy, we did 2-year back crediting, and the process and the project gained the W+ credits from time saving from 2 years backwards. There may be so many other mitigation projects out there that are having impacts on women, but they've never measured.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think this could potentially be a great solution also to some of those very local challenges that communities face in actually implementing climate projects. So great. I think, is it wplus.org for more information?
Yes.
Yes, wplus.org if you want to know more. So thank you, Janet. That's great. Now moving to Unep Dtu Partnership, we have, as I mentioned before, Karen Olsen. Great to have you with us. Now you are working on the establishment of a community of practice for policy dialogue and capacity building activities among parties, private sectors, and voluntary market players, and looking at how that could accelerate and enhance implementation of Article 6 cooperative approaches. Yeah, please share a little bit about your work and your perspectives.
Yes, so first a little bit of history and background on the initiative that we have started since 2017, Unep Dtu Partnership, together with the Gold Standard Foundation. Looking at the Article 6 negotiations and the prominent position of sustainable development, the objective is to enhance ambition of mitigation adaptation and support sustainable development. So looking at what happened in the past under the Kyoto Protocol and the Clean Development Mechanism, where there was a similar objective, but no tools and support to assess sustainable development impacts, which led to what some have called a race to the bottom, because there was an incentive to just approve at no cost from host countries that a project was aligned with priorities. But there was no information necessarily. There could be, but there could also not be. It was a little bit a black box. And this incentivized that it could just be ignored. And we thought, let's not repeat past mistakes. Let's try to do better this time. So the initiative wanted to have a policy dialogue. There was a tool. It came, I think it was 2014, a voluntary CDM, Sustainable Development Tool. So we thought, how can we enhance capacity, both to inform parties to do provisions, to enable tools and approaches being made available to those who need it. But rules are not enough. Don't necessarily get implemented unless you have capacity. So we also look in the initiative, we look at pilot activities, demonstrating how can that be done. And we look at the community of practice. So now that some people have experience, just as you're a Women Plus standard and the biogas project, now that experience is there, how do we share it and learn from one another, which is what the community of practice intends to do.
Exactly. Now, and also, if you could dive a little bit more into the types of sustainable development goals and impacts that you are looking at and trying to disseminate, and share a little bit more details on that would be great.
Well, we look at them all. We look at all the sustainable development benefits, and we try to identify which ones are the drivers for what mitigation activities. I personally believe that that can leverage, enhance ambition, because the sustainable development benefits stay in the host countries, whereas your unit gets sold, traded outside. But the women empowerment stays in the country. The jobs, if you ensure they are nationally embedded, skills in the countries, they stay in the country. The clean air, health benefits, they stay in the country, whereas you sell the units. So we look at all the sustainable development impacts, assess what are they, quantify, so that you know. And in the community of practice, we try to identify who are the strategic partners, where is it that the knowledge sits, and then we want to have webinars, share the analytical reports, make them available. And I think also there's an element of knowing the who is who. I mean, we are not that big community. It's highly complex, it's highly technical. So getting to know one another, maybe also at a personal level, also matters for a community of practice. So we want to help facilitate that.
And what do you see the role of this community of practice being for to mobilize the political will and the public demand for ambitious climate action also at country level? You mentioned all these benefits that stay behind. How important is this to get people on board?
I think for the policy dialogue, the sort of the normative aspects, what counts, what do you mean by high quality carbon credits? I mean, what is that? We need to have a conversation about that. There's a Nordic initiative exactly on that. For the Nordic countries, I don't know if maybe there are some things that are specifically Nordic, such as women empowerment. We proud ourselves to think that there's a great contribution from that perspective. And then in other countries, it's other perspectives. I recall one, I think it was in Cambodia. A key priority for sustainable development was getting rid of landmines because of the war history. It can be that specific, that particular to the country context. It's not, I mean, it's generic, it's the common language, 2030 agenda and SDGs, but it's also country specific. So having these conversations in the community of practice is necessary.
Yeah. And how broad is the engagement? And because the magic happens the moment you have different perspectives in the room, and not just people talking about the mitigation potential alone, the finance people alone, and the SDGs kind of socioeconomic co-benefits people alone. You don't get anywhere. It's bringing everybody together. So how easy is it to actually get that dialogue going? And what are the barriers actually to actually understanding that yes, higher socioeconomic co-benefits actually could lead to better and higher ambitions for mitigation and better outcomes also from the finance perspective? Now, why are we still struggling a little bit to bring everybody on the same page?
I think in the past, the carbon market was quite narrowly focused on the price of emission reductions only. You could say a climate-first approach. And I think in the Paris architecture, the urgency, the crises, the challenges mean that we can't look just at climate alone. It's a society challenge with huge impacts. Transformational change for net zero and sustainable development. So the challenge is so big that it's no longer just projects and emission reductions. It's we heard in the earlier session. It's policy-based crediting. It's upscaled. It's ambition raising. All that. So I think that from the sustainable development perspective, this conversation is much easier to have today than it was in the past, which I'm personally really happy for that.
Yeah. So maybe back to you, Janet, because sort of preparing for this session and asking around in my office what should I ask when I have these people in front of me, and one of the questions that came was, okay, so if we do put a premium on carbon that comes to the benefit of the women, now what is the risk that could actually depress the price of carbon at a specific project level if there is only so much money going around and then some of the investment then goes to a socioeconomic clearly defined outcome?
I don't see any risk. From our discussions with potential buyers are interested, willing to pay a premium for this type of credit. And we even have a lot of buyers who are interested in, as I mentioned, the fact that there is at least 20% of the value of the credit needs to be returned to women's groups. So there are many buyers also who don't care about the carbon, but are really looking as well as seeing this as a mechanism to make a transparent flow and that could be for a lot of reasons. It could be for philanthropic reasons. It could be they understand gender equality initiatives also de-risk your investment in any kind of a project, particularly climate. So I think I've never heard that before, and I couldn't think of any kind of risk that could come from that. There's a willingness to pay. I believe it. We'll see. Next COP will come back and we'll tell you exactly what that willingness is.
That is indeed the aim and the hope.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if the two of you would like to chime in on the importance, maybe from your perspective from Vietnam, the importance of, I mean, you are looking a lot at the greenhouse gas impact of climate action. Now, how do you see it from your perspective, the need to bring in sort of a broader conversation, alignment with sustainable development plans at a national level?
Yes. So for the case of Vietnam, we see that climate change response is responsible of everyone. So for gender perspective, for example, I'm not gender expert, but I am the one who worked for policy of the government. So when developing the NDC of Vietnam or the law, so we are not gender expert. We do not have the perspective, gender perspective. But we do not want the document that we produce, what they call that we are gender blind. So that's why we ask gender expert to come in, look at the document, what you can see, what you can propose that we should change. So through that involvement, I think that our NDC, our policy, at the moment, at least for climate change, we believe that we respond to the need of women as well.
That's great. Now, I want to also open up the floor if anybody in the audience has any questions that you would like to ask. Feel free. We have microphones floating around. Yeah. Think about your questions. Don't be shy. While you think about your questions, I don't see any hands. Just back to the mitigation ambition. So one of the big questions, I think, about around the need to go beyond NDC targets when you go into sort of the Article 6 markets. Now, is there a risk there of this kind of perverse incentive to then keep NDC targets low so that you then have a wider scope for? I don't know if that's something that came up in your research and in your experience.
No, definitely. I mean, that's a key question and also a potential risk of carbon market engagement that many stakeholders see. But just to respond to that of course, I think there are different ways of addressing that risk. The one is rules, the other one is tools, and the other one is also the kind of demand that we are creating, right? So I do believe that this risk of keeping your NDC low is a key question in the negotiations, and it relates to how do you account for things that happen outside of your NDC. And the question is then, if something is outside of your NDC, do you need to do a corresponding adjustment to the emissions that you have in your NDC? Because that would put a strong incentive to not keep sectors out, but to integrate them into your NDC, even if you're putting your ambition elsewhere, but just to have that sort of broad accounting. And then the Paris cycle can kick in, and once you have included a sector in NDC, you need to continue to monitor it, you need to set targets. And I think there is also the potential of Article 6, especially in sectors, let's say, where where the government thinks, okay, I'm having great risks here of engaging or putting a target on that. If you start by engaging it through a market mechanism and identifying what I can do in this sector, which is additional to what I do in other sectors, this can help you build your capacities and better understand what can the private sector do, where can I set my target for next time. So it's a bit of both. Then on tools, so if we go beyond accounting rules, which can hedge that risk, we have tools. And I think that relates a lot to the methodologies and how we define additionality. And I do believe we need to define additionality of activities or policy instruments that we are financing through carbon markets beyond just being not in the unconditional part of the NDC. We need to have a better and broader definition to make sure the carbon finance is going to where it really incentivizes additional action and is not happening otherwise. It relates to it's not part of your laws, or it goes beyond your laws, or it prepares the implementation of a law, and it is not something that can be financed otherwise. So I think there's a lot of potential of developing also new baseline setting approaches that are very stringent. And if you can only generate emission credits against a very stringent reference level, then that kind of eliminates that perverse incentive to have a very lenient target in your NDC, because there's nothing to gain there through the market. So that is on rules and tools, but I also believe it's a bit of who is engaging in carbon markets, and I'm quite hopeful that through these discussions on principles, through these communities of practice, through setting up frameworks of what kind of mitigation outcomes we want to see on the market, there is also a recognition for what is a high quality carbon market, and I think a high quality mitigation outcome is one that does not set that kind of perverse incentives. And I do believe that there's also some quality and demand needed here. And the quality and demand links also to the willingness to pay higher prices. So I think it's an overall system that we need to create which works on these 3 dimensions.
Yeah, great. So we have a question from the audience, please. Not yet. Try to speak.
Now.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, yes. So hello, my name is Hanna-Maria Ahonen. I work for the Prospectus Climate Research, but also on Nordic Article 6 pilots and the criteria and tools that would be applied throughout any pilots on Article 6 or cooperation that Nordics are working on. I'm specifically interested, well, on everything you've been saying, but specifically on the gender aspects. And it reminds me that the Finnish government actually did the gender study on CDM already 10 years ago. And one of the findings they were that actually saving women's time is actually very transformational. So I'm hoping very much to take this back to applying it throughout all Nordic, or recommending the application of this. But I'd like to understand a little bit more, what would be your recommendations if you want to take gender aspects into account in any activity? What kind of data would you need to have, like gender disaggregated data? What sort of, is it about engaging early on, or what sort of practical steps would you recommend? I'll also, of course, have a look at the standard. Thank you.
Janet, that's a question for you. So
yeah,
talk us through
the cycle. It's a promise also, right? It's a good question. I think, anytime you're dealing with putting gender activities within a project, the best thing to do is start a fresh project, right? But we don't want to limit it only to projects that are new and fresh. So we're really willing to look at the existing one. The W Plus requires a gender analysis and a consultative process with women at the first stage. And the other steps are just like a carbon. We do a PDD, we do a baseline, and we really are measuring the change from the baseline to the results. And we can, a project can measure results whenever it feels ready. We don't have to wait a 1-year period. So in the case where a project like the Nepal one had already been delivering benefits, we could immediately, using control group to measure for baseline, we could immediately measure that. So, I have to say as well, we're willing to be flexible with the standard to meet. Our goal is to drive more finance and to enable more women to benefit and engage in these climate projects. What does it take to do that? We can tweak the standard as needed, but I think, you understand how it could. Good.
Excellent. I don't know, Karin, whether you have anything to add to the how do we ensure that was particularly about gender, but if we could look at any sort of socioeconomic co-benefit and the project cycle, if you will, in terms of generating investment opportunities through a market mechanism. Do you have any tools and tricks up your sleeve and in the community of practice?
We are working on it, I would say. I think speaking to what Aglaya said about corresponding adjustments and how to go beyond NDCs, how to incentivize that, and what is the role of carbon markets. We are working on new tools to assess the transformational impact of Article 6 activities, policies and actions. And I think when doing this study, which is not yet published, but it's getting there, we see that with regard to the price of the credits, to have ambitious targets, it's going to get more expensive. And you don't want to undermine countries' own abilities to meet their own NDC targets at the lowest possible price. So the low-hanging fruits need to stay in the countries. For Vietnam, for all other countries to do what they can by their own means, the cheapest possible way. And we need to get the rules in place for the carbon markets to pay for the high-hanging fruits. That means emission reductions with integrity, high quality, are going to get a lot more expensive.
No discount for high quality.
No, quality
absolutely.
costs money, and it's going to be hopefully the market paying for that, incentivizing the high quality.
Excellent. Now, any other questions from the audience? Again, I would like to invite everyone, keeping my eye out to see, but do shout if you want to ask questions. Now, a few of you have mentioned sort of the national context, the national ownership, and the importance of national ownership of both NDC developing process and target setting. So when we talk about national ownership and the readiness component that you speak about, how do we ensure that the control is with those that are getting ready? I don't know if you've looked at that from your perspective, also from the community or practice side, and capacity building. How do we make sure that we level the playing field between buyers and sellers in the markets by making sure that everyone sits at the table and actually has a control of the process of getting ready for market mechanisms?
Yeah, I can maybe start with an answer, and then hopefully my fellow panelists can complement. So what we see in the NDC setting and formulation process is that a key barrier to formulate NDCs is data access and getting everyone on the table. And especially with the first round of NDCs, we have seen a lot of submissions that were based on externally provided knowledge. People that come into the country, look at the kind of data that was there, put something together, mix some targets up, and that was the document. And we see now a more detailed process coming up for the updates. Many countries have adopted more and more extensive process, but I do believe that there's still a lot of best practice to learn. And I do hope that the support for the enhanced transparency framework will help with that, because you need to have your data together, you need to have your dialogue with all the stakeholders, the local stakeholders, the sectoral stakeholders, the businesses associations to get to the data. And that will help you to have an NDC which is country-driven. And that helps you to have an Article 6 strategy that is country-driven and not reacting to external demand coming and saying like, okay, well, they want this, so we'll make the project like that. No, to have it the other way around. And I do believe that the following year, I think, when countries start, or as Vietnam is already fully in that phase of developing the framework for the NDC implementation, that will be absolutely crucial. And I really hope that Article 6 experts are really included in that process and are mindful of the overall framework conditions, and that the carbon market expert community, I think, in contrast to the CM, must really learn how to navigate the broader policy framework in many countries. And I think that will require a lot of learning, definitely.
Yeah. Pam, I don't know, you might want to add from the government of Vietnam's perspective.
So how we involve other sectors in the NDC process, formulation process. Our ministries and ministries of natural resources and environment, we are responsible for leading the process. But first, we consider that NDC is a national contribution, not government contribution. So first, we involve own ministries involved with that. Then ask them to send experts to work with us, because they are the one who implement the NDC. They have to know what they going to contribute and how to contribute, when and where resources come from. So ministries, they have come up with information we just put in, and then make it become plan. Then we go to consult with wider stakeholder, include business sector, and then get their input So that's the way that we're doing for NDC of Vietnam. So for implementation as well, because what they can do, they can provide. So the role of us is only facilitate the process. So that is the way that we involve other sectors in Vietnam.
Great, thank you. Karin, if you have anything to add to...
Maybe if I can share the example of working with Vietnam for capacity building support to implement the enhanced transparency MRV system at sector level. We have worked on building capacity for MRV for the past 2 years or so. And I think one way that we can sort of have enable synergies is that because MRV and data is so important also for markets, we can link the capacity support for transparency now to the capacity building also for Article 6 readiness for ITMO transactions. So we just started doing that. Maybe next COP we can tell you the results of that.
Thank you for the support.
So we are already starting to look forward to COP27 next year. So now maybe a final question. We will bring who are left from the previous panel up to the stage in a minute to do a couple of final questions to all. But just before we get to that, Janet, so the local ownership, and I think the way that you are looking at this is really truly locally led initiatives and engagement of actual women in local communities and women's groups and things like that. So maybe if you get to have the final word of this panel.
And I firmly believe it's that benefit sharing component that's a requirement of the standard. I wish more standards would require that. But that's what enables, and as I said, our standard does not provide any required actions by that women's groups, but we are very concerned with the fact right now the amount of funding that goes to any kind of women's organization around the world is 0.1% of development financing. 0.1. So this is meant to be a way to bring back some control to women's organizations. They know what to do, and in many cases that funding is used for adaptation-related purposes. That's empowerment, that's enabling agency of women to decide what they know and follow best. So I think that's the key.
It is a key solution to particularly adaptation and the need for locally led adaptation and finance flows down to local levels. So yes, we also want to have a round of questions to the panelists of previous. So Fenella, if you want to join me on stage. I don't know, do we have panelists from the...
I think we actually have our moderator who managed to make it here
Ash,
by train.
Ash Sharma, if you want to join us on stage, you're welcome to.
Might actually be able to come up on stage a little bit.
So the Scottish Railway brought him safely to Glasgow.
So and then also, I think Mr. Boucham, maybe Mr. Boucham, if you take the chair and Ash and I can stand a little bit at the side. So
I have a microphone. Who needs, I guess, let's share this one here.
Okay, so who's asking this? Okay, we've got a double acting, Feld.
Sorry?
We've got a double act. Great, okay, so have you got a question? Or have I?
Yeah, sure. So yes, so this is the lovely panel of the two sessions. So just to conclude, we want to perhaps look a little bit at what is now happening in terms of the negotiations and the rule book for Article 6. So if we look at future carbon markets, what must the rule book look like to truly ensure that Article 6 market enhances ambitions and contributes effectively to sustainable development, including women's empowerment and social inclusion. So the rule book and what do we want to see come out of the negotiations in terms of high ambitions, both for mitigation but also these co-benefits. So yeah, let's do a round around the panel.
All right, so maybe if we take that question and just say, Mr. Boucham, so let's work this out. The rule book is not decided, let's say. Worst case scenario, it's not decided at this COP. Will you still carry on with the Article 6 activities that you're looking at with multiple potential transactions?
Yes, I think that we encourage to have high ambition, but we should take an account on the social and economic impacts. Also, yes, SDGs, but also we should have to ensure that we have environmental integrity. That's my point of view.
Fantastic. And I think same question to Ash, actually. So if you're looking at your initial pilot activities in Uganda, let's say, so your transportation activities, what happens if the rule book isn't decided? What does that mean for NICA and NEFCO?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, and apologies for not being here. I apologize for that. Yeah, I think in terms of what we see going forwards, of course, if the rule book doesn't materialize, and let's not be too pessimistic. I heard that things are going fairly well. Yeah, I think we certainly want to see the market developing, and we do see a strong role going forward for piloting. I think there are so many aspects of the market infrastructure that we've already developed, and we've seen the methodologies, the registry. I don't think there's much discussion about the registries and these kinds of things. They're working, and we're seeing that those aspects of the market are very clear. My concern really is about the demand, and I think seeing the signal, the negative signal that lack of progress for a third COP would have on the market worries me, and I think that's where we need to possibly be concerned. But I think there's a lot of momentum around the carbon market. There's a lot of actors who are very interested. We've seen that the NDCs, many of the African NDCs, see an important role for carbon pricing. So I think the train has left the station. Unfortunately, mine didn't this morning.
Yeah,
but
didn't quite get here though.
Maybe
got here late.
That wasn't
maybe that's the thing. It just got here. It got here just late. So same as Article 6.
Well, in that case, better late than never.
Okay, so I think I want to sort of lead on from that, because you bring in a very good point there, the demand. So this is, what would Norway do? What would Sweden, who's looking to use it for their net zero, net negative deal goals? Korea has already announced that they will be looking to the carbon markets. Everyone's talking about Japan being ready. So what would these buyers do then if they can't use Article 6 credits? They've suddenly got to take every Volvo off the road?
No, I think you make a good point. I think it's a very important tool in the toolbox, and I think that we're going to need to have, as mentioned, we need high quality credits. We do need credits, and I think that at least from my perspective, I can see that there are, as I mentioned, there's so much investment that's gone into this market over the years. We've seen so many projects, and we've seen so much human capacity that's been built. I think that countries like Norway and Sweden, they see the opportunities going forward. I think we do need to have more buyers step up, though. I think we do need to have more piloting. We need to see more action from many of the other countries that you haven't mentioned. But I think we're on the right track at least. Sorry.
Thank you, Ash. Maybe over to some of the rest of the panel. I don't know, Karen or Mr. Pam or Carrie on the online. We won't forget the online participants. I've been in that position myself last week. So who would like to comment next?
I don't want to take the role of old ladies here because old men first speak first. So please, I can share, but after you.
Well, I can maybe start a bit. I mean, I've been following Article 6 negotiations quite closely last week, and I think there are some hopeful signs of giving a strong mandate, for instance, for the new mechanism to look at SDG tools and sustainable development tools. And I think that's important, right, that we have that international mandate, because we need to have an international discussion on it. And I think the mechanism could be a platform to discuss about these tools for sustainable development. And I also see that parties will be required to report on sustainable development. And I think there are many good ways and many tools out there. We need to raise awareness on them so that parties use them to do their reporting. And I think there's an opportunity here. And then for the Article 6 negotiations, I do hope we get them. And I do hope we get them with a strong mandate in the Article 6.4 mechanism for new approaches to set baseline and determine additionality, and a clear mandate to develop new tools and methodologies in that regard, because that's a part of the toolbox I was speaking on before. So I hope for a deal, and I hope for a good one.
For myself, one of the expectations of our delegation to come to COP26 is wishing that the Article 6 is get through. So because we see that it is important part for achieve our NDC. But things may move hard or easy, but that is the trend. The involvement of business sector, the carbon market is the trend. So that's why we already reflect in our regulation. Our regulation is designed in the way that it can move along with the changing a little bit of Article 6. But the trend for involvement of private sector in contribute for greenhouse gas reduction is the trend. And then we design our document, policy on that way. So we can go with that, whether the COP26 can adopt the rule for Article 6 or not.
Excellent. Now over to you, Kari, on the line. Do you wish to contribute? Hope you heard the question.
Yes, thank you very much. I fully agree what was said previously. I mean, even if there's no rule book in place, which I hope there will be, I mean, I think it really makes sense to continue this path and really try to develop these pilots and learning by doing, as we have a very good example in the Kyoto era, which we could replicate and further develop these roles. Thank you.
Great. Karin?
Just to say that our Costa Rica panelist has just arrived straight from the negotiations. If Philippe would share any reflections on the question on where do we stand with the rule book. I don't know if he can.
Welcome. Can you see him?
Yes, he is right here.
Yes, please come forward. So yes, we have held a seat for you, Felipe de Leon, who is the advisor to the Climate Change Directorate at the Ministry of Environment in Costa Rica, and he happens to also lead the San Jose Principles. So you come at a very good time, so please share what's happening at the negotiations and how do we move forward depending on outcomes and perhaps not finalized rule books.
Thank you, and apologies for being late. It's a big venue.
I think you have to speak into the microphone. Yeah, that's good.
Well, that puts me in my head. So thank you, and apologies for being late. It's a big venue, and we had a session that just closed. I'll be honest, for once since I've started doing this in Paris, I am very, very cautiously optimistic that we are making progress. And I think that has to be said. Very, very cautiously optimistic, because we recognize that part of the reason we have been able to make progress is that we have been focusing on the most technical of issues, right? And we have been focusing on trying to make sure that the more complex issues, what are often referred to as the political issues, are clearly framed, and that everything else that can be fixed has been fixed. I think we're getting there. There are still plenty of brackets in the text, and there's still a lot of work to be done, but very cautiously optimistic. I think that's the first message. My second message perhaps would be that I would hope that we can look at this in a slightly bigger focus now that we're getting to the political components, where if we try to take them on one by one and ask only the specific question, can you have a transition of units, or can you have an Article 6.4 that doesn't do corresponding adjustment, the answers become rather hard to move around from, right? No and no generally. But if we look at a broader package, and if we start looking at what is the total impact that this mechanism would have, or that these decisions would have, and we start looking for spaces where we can increase ambition, increase rigor, increase the safeguards for environmental integrity from a technical perspective, this perhaps gives our political leaders a slightly bigger space to maneuver in, because we have created that space by building in high rigor, high ambition, high environmental integrity, technical elements into the decisions. And I think we are building in that direction. As to what happens if we don't get a decision, my job is very much to make sure that we do, and I think that's where our focus has to be right now. I think it is useful and it is important that we have a group such as the San Jose Principles Coalition that has already spelled out what they expect, right? What we expect out of this. And that has already spelled out what would be considered a successful outcome. In our case, as Costa Rica, we have already committed to implementing the San Jose Principles regardless of what happens in the rules, right? That's part of our NDC. And so that is perhaps a hint at something that we may look at, or other parties may look at, if there are elements in the decision that is good enough to be accepted, right? Because we have to recognize that this is all ultimately about compromise, and it's all about a risk calculation at the end of the day. What is riskier? To continue to punt this into the future, to continue to leave the world without rules, to continue to have a voluntary market that is quickly escalating and scaling up in the absence of any rules, or is there less risk, and this of course will depend on the details, in taking on a decision that is perhaps not perfect, but that perhaps parties can complement from their own individual jurisdictions or across coalitions such as ours. Thanks.
Great. That was optimistic words, and we are very happy. Maybe it is time to close the session on such a high note. Things are moving forward. So, Fenella, do you want to do us the honor of singing the last song of the morning?
Well, at this point, I don't know whether we sort of, ought to be going into Old Lang Syne or something, and flinging a bit of haggis around the place. It's, geographically appropriate. Okay. I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. And, we know whether it's trains, whether it's negotiations, whether it takes an hour to get in the door here in the mornings, various things. The trick is just grab hold of the nearest minister and sort of go in as his +1. Is the easiest way to get in here, but it doesn't always work. And they do kind of bring security out if you're not careful. And also, Kari, I would like to thank you very much for joining remotely and for all of your contributions. I think what we have learned this morning is that there's an awful lot still to go, but 300 square brackets down to 200 was not bad going. Let's just take it as a third. There's a plan, even if we don't make the rules. Progress is already moving on. We're already doing things. Morocco, you've got 3 activities, whether it is energy efficiency, whether it is organic waste to energy, change of policy. You've got NEFCO looking Uganda, efficient transport. So things are moving. We're not sitting and waiting for the answer, but we're pretty positive. We're going to be pretty positive that we're going to get one. Everyone knows what needs to happen, and the whole point is we do this carbon market so that we find an economic efficiency. It's not the ozone, it doesn't matter where the emissions are reduced. So we should reduce them where it is cheaper, with high environmental integrity, with the sustainable development aspects, including gender, and where, therefore, can we make the most impact in order to reduce emissions globally. And with that, I think I'll say thank you very much, and if you could put your hands together for all of our panelists today. Thank you.